Gil Sloan did good, and he did it well. He was, of course, a kind friend, a loving father, a careful and thoughtful scientist, and a deeply committed activist. But most of all, he made a difference in this community and in this world. The truth of that is plain to see in those of us who are gathered in this space, nearly full to overflowing. In those who are here who themselves were fellow activists, members of our political leadership, students who he taught and instructed and mentored, and people who he met along the way, who got to walk along life's path with him, if only for a little while, who were deeply moved by him and his presence here with us. In this moment, we gather to remember him, and in fulfillment of our sacred obligations, to bring comfort to his family, to his sons, their spouses, their children, and their grandchildren, his great-grandchildren. That we may be fully present in this sacred space at this sacred time, I'm going to ask us that if we have a mobile device with us, that is to say, a cell phone, that we go ahead and put it in mute now. In this service, we will hear words and reminiscences of friends and family, music that he so deeply loved, and the words of our sacred tradition, words that he would have known well from this space and other Jewish spaces. And so in this moment, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, and light as in darkness, and joy as in sorrow, and life as in death. We begin with the words of the 23rd Psalm, which has brought comfort to so many in our tradition and beyond. Cantor Pellin will lead us first in the Hebrew, and then we will join together in the English.
Adonai roi lo echsar bino et asher yor b'tzeini amei menuchot amei menuchot yana aleini nafshi yeshovev yeshovev yanchani b'maglei tzedek yanchani b'maglei tzedek laman shemo gam ki lich vigil son mavet lairora ki ata imadi shivtecha ui mishantecha heimoyin achamuni ta'aroch lefanai לפניי שולחן נגד צורריי תשענת ושמן ראשי כוסי רוויי אך טוב וחסד ידפוני כל ימי חיי כל ימי חיי ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. אדוני רואי לא אחסר. אדוני רואי לא אחסר.
If you know the words to the 23rd Psalm, I invite you to join with me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We turn now to family friend, to Gil's friend, Rabbi Douglas Krantz, to offer words of memory and recollection.
When I was asked to organize Delaware for J Street, I received a list of names for people that I was supposed to contact. The only name I knew in all of Delaware was Biden, and he was not on that list. One of the names was Dr. Robert Abel, and he ended up being my guide to the people of Delaware. When Senator Coons scheduled an event at the JCC to discuss his thoughts about the Iran nuclear deal, we went with Rob and Mike Abel. At that event, Rob pointed out a woman to me named Sonia Sloan. Sonia was instrumental in helping organize Delaware for J Street. Everyone returned her calls, and she made lots of them. We became friends and spoke almost every day. As friends, we talked about our families, and that is how I came to know and appreciate Gil. It was through the words of the thoughts and the heart of the woman who loved him most. When Sonia died, Gil became my lunch friend and companion. Sonia had told me about Gil and about meeting him at DuPont. When Sonia died, there was a hole in many lives, including mine. Gil and I had lunch almost weekly. Gil was a scientist and told me stories about his lab and his work. What we talked about most at the beginning was our marriages and the good fortune we had to marry women we loved deeply. Gil did not go into detail about his work because he knew I would not understand what he was talking about. It would have been as if I were speaking to him in Hebrew. When it came to our careers, we did not have a common language. When it came to our liberal values and being strong Democrats, we spoke the exact same language. When it came to our wives, our children, and our grandchildren, we spoke the same language of love, affection, and blessing. Gil was deeply blessed by his life with Sonia. I say that not alone because he told me, but also because he could not even bear to leave the home they had created together. Theirs was a life of profound, affective dependency, rooted in significant love and mutual admiration. Gil was a scientist and believed in reason and scientific methods of analysis, experimentation, and proof. But he loved his wife, his boys, their wives, and the grandchildren with profound joy and gratitude that transcended all of reason. These next passages are what I want to say about Gil, who was my friend. What the great orator Robert Ingersoll said at the graveside over 100 years ago is what I want to say about Gil today. Gil added to the sum of human joy, and were everyone to whom he did some loving service bring a single blossom to his grave, he would sleep tonight under a wilderness of flowers. Gil Sloan added to the sum of human joy. Gil Sloan was a good and loving man. Mark Antony's words from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar were seemingly written about Gil. His life was gentle, and the elements so mixed in him that nature might stand up and say to all the world, "This was a man." Gil was our man. We are blessed and grateful to have been loved by Gil and Sonia, and to hold warm memories of them in our hearts as a gift and a blessing for the rest of our lives.
Sorgen zählt von deinem Glanz allein erhöht. O viel ist ganz, o viel ist ganz. Die Sorgen zählt von deinem Glanz allein erhöht. O viel ist ganz, o viel ist ganz.
We welcome forward Diane Franklin, a dear family friend, as well as Gil's research partner, Andrew McGee.
Okay, thank you. In the mid-50s, when I was a little girl, we didn't have Judy Blume to guide us through puberty or adolescence. No one talked about sex very much. So when I found a book in my parents' bookcase, among the history books and the poetry and all the others, there was a book called something like Your Body, and I was just thrilled. I read it truly from cover to cover. Years later, I remember very little from that book, and probably a lot was wrong because we've learned a lot about the body. I certainly don't remember where the gallbladder is or what bile is made from. But what I do remember is that it said, at the end, it said, you will grow old, and when you do, you will become unbeauteous, and you will die. And worse, it said, no one will miss you, and you will be forgotten. And that's what I've remembered all these years, truly. Now, and it has stayed with me, but you know what? It was wrong. You die, but the rest of it was wrong. Steve and I first met Sonia and Gil when we were newly married, and we're going to be married 50 years in October. Through the years, we've gotten to know the Sloans very well, and in a sense, have grown old with them, along with their family. Victor, Jonathan, we've all grown old. Sonia and Gil were our son Daniel's godparents and took their role very seriously. We were regulars at their Seder. In recent years, we have spent many hours with Gil and have gotten to know him better over many lunches. We thought we were the lunch people, it turns out. There were other lunch people. Gil was an example of how to live with dignity in your old age. He could have given a course on this. He was continued to maintain his intellectual curiosity, and he always had a good sense of humor. He had a treasure trove of Soviet jokes, and he loved telling them, and they were good jokes. He was always up to date on the news and could always provide a good historical perspective. He never lost his passion for the principled and ethical political process. He had many wonderful, interesting stories about being in Italy during World War II, and then being on the draft board in Wilmington during the Vietnam War. He was continuing to work professionally with Drew at Penn, and Drew will tell you all about it, and he spoke warmly of the students who were fortunate enough to have interacted with him. he was continuing to study. He was always continuing to learn. For example, his learning Italian. He enjoyed his family, that was very obvious, and he was very proud of them. It seemed to us that he had a baseball hat for every one of his grandchildren's schools. He was independent to the point he always refused our offer to pick him up and bring him to our home for lunch. He always came a few minutes early, not so early that you say, oh, he's here, but just a couple of minutes, like 5 minutes, and we were happy about that. But one time he wasn't early, and we were really getting concerned, and we were going to call him. But then a car, not Gil's, came into our driveway, and what happened was Gil's car wouldn't start, and he didn't want to trouble us, so he got an Uber, and we still have a problem figuring out how to get an Uber. So the book was truly, truly wrong. Gil did not become unbeauteous in his old age. He is missed, and he will not be forgotten. Thank you.
This is a sad occasion as we gather here to say goodbye to Gilbert, who has influenced so many lives, especially mine. We will miss both him and Sonia. I will miss a great friend, neighbor, colleague, co-author, and mentor. I first met Gilbert at a conference in 1966, shortly after arriving in Philadelphia as a postdoctoral fellow. We were both working in the same area of organic materials chemistry. We bonded and became firm friends. Following my postdoc, I returned to Scotland, but after a year, I decided to return to the States when Gil offered me an industrial postdoctoral position, working with him at DuPont in Dick Merrifield's research group, where we were the materials guys. In his lab, I introduced Gil to Robert Burns' poetry and songs, and frequently you could hear us singing our favorite song, Flow Gently, Sweet Afton. The first verse is this: flow gently, sweet Afton, among thy green braes. Flow gently, I'll sing thee a song in thy praise. My Mary's asleep by thy murmuring stream. Flow gently, sweet Afton, disturb not her dream. I recite this for a reason. Burns wrote this song following the death of his true love, Mary Campbell, who died of a fever. Mary asleep is a metaphor for her death, and the flowing river Afton refers to the passage of time. We continued to sing this song over the last 50 years. When my position with Gil ended, I set up a new facility for organic materials in the LRSM. That's the Laboratory for Research on the Structure of Matter at the University of Pennsylvania. And that's where I have spent the last 53 years. Now, one of our most important purification techniques was zone melting. In fact, in the 1960s, Gil designed a zone melting unit, which he built, along with Norman McGowan, in his basement and sold commercially. I actually had 3 of them in my lab at Penn. This, however, was a small batch process. I had an idea for a continuous process. I demonstrated proof of concept, then took it to DuPont. Gil liked the idea, built a working unit, and we published a paper on it in 1980, in one of our most important publications. In 1975, Arnold Weisberger asked Gil to write a book on melt crystallization techniques for his respected Techniques of Chemistry series. Gil asked me to co-author it with him, and in 1988 it was published. During much of that time, we spent 2 evenings a week working on it in his study. We drank so much coffee that Sonny eventually started charging me 25 cents a cup. And when the book was published, we used that fund to have a wonderful meal out. When Gil retired from DuPont, he set up his own lab within Norquay, a small chemical company in Chester, Pennsylvania, which he ran successfully until the early 2000s. After that, I arranged for him to volunteer at the LRSM, where he assisted Professor Russell Composta's students with their projects in materials science and engineering. He also donated some of his old but useful equipment to the lab. and the students humorously made up a nameplate which read, Gilbert J. Sloan, Adjunct Professor. For the last 6 years, Gil has been working part-time in my lab, and we published 3 papers with Professor Peter Beckman of Bryn Mawr College and presented several papers at conferences. In fact, only last week I submitted an abstract of a paper with Gilbert as lead author. It is on an OLED, that's an organic light-emitting diode material, that he first synthesized 20 years ago. So even now, he is still contributing to the scientific literature. Anne and I have lived near the Sloans in Indianfield for over 50 years, and we hope to emulate Sonny and Gil by living there until we too get the call. For the last decade or so, the McGees and Sloans have shared Sunday night pizza in each other's homes, and this became a tradition until Sonny died, after which we always had Gil come to us until he fractured his pelvis on January the 25th, which happened to be Robert Burns' birthday. Most of you know Gil was a great raconteur and had anecdotes to fit any occasion. He had marvelous delivery and recall of detail, whether it was tales from his childhood in New York, New Jersey, college in Michigan, or his army service in the Chemical Corps in Italy. I seldom heard him repeat a story. His collection of tales appeared endless. Let me close by paraphrasing Robert Burns. Flow gently, sweet Afton, among thy green braes. Flow gently, I'll sing thee a song in thy praise. Our Gilbert's asleep by thy murmuring stream. Flow gently, sweet Afton, disturb not his dream. Okay.
A large part of Gil and Sonia's life was not just their own activism, but mentoring others, especially those who would then go on to serve in public office. There are a number of individuals here today. I will not attempt to list them because I will fail and leave someone out. But know that that the family sees you and we see you, and we're so grateful that you are here. Leaders at the national level, at the state and county level, at the local level. And it was not unusual to see some or another who was interested in seeking public office out to coffee, surely with Sonia, but sometimes confiding and checking in with Gil as well, who we can all attest had a different style, but no less wisdom. When we bid farewell to Sonia a few years ago, their dear friends, the Bidens, were here in attendance, and then former Vice President Joe Biden was able to speak from the Bima. Now President Biden, as you might imagine, is otherwise detained. But we know he wishes he were here, and that Jill wishes she were here, and they sent this letter to be read out loud. These are the President and the First Lady's words. Dear Sloan family, the rabbis tell us what comes from the heart enters the heart. For more than 50 years, we were blessed to call Gil our dear friend and felt his love in our hearts. It was a love grounded in faith, which he lived in word and deed. He lived a life of honesty and decency and treated everyone with dignity and respect. Determined with a backbone of steel and a fierce intellect, he was also guided by a genuine humility and moral clarity. Gil possessed the rare combination of a scientist's mind, an activist's will, and a poet's heart. He believed in us so that we believed in ourselves. He was the friend who was always there, and you never had to ask. Like countless others looking to live that good life of purpose, we looked to Gil. And when we looked to Gil, we always saw how he looked at his beloved Sonny. Together they gave meaning to the playwright's words, "Come live with me and be my love, and we shall all the pleasures prove." Together Gil and Sonny proved life's pleasures. Their partnership was one for the ages. We were fortunate to consider them family. Wells of inspiration, advice, and support, they encouraged us to get involved in the big issues of our time and helped shape our view of the world. One of the great pleasures of watching our children grow up was watching them lean on Gil and Sonny as well. We also take comfort in knowing their spirits live on in their incredible family. To Jonathan, Victor, and all the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, you are blood of the blood and bone of the bone of two of the finest people we have ever known. We know it's hard, but we promise the day will come when the memory of Gil brings a smile to your lips before it brings a tear to your eye. Our prayer for you is that this day comes sooner rather than later. Gilbert Sloan shared the gifts of his intellect and wisdom to make sure this community, our state, and our nation lived up to its full promise. May God bless this good man and our dear friend, and may God bless this great American.
I hope you don't mind if I go off book and read the words here. I guess really I'm on book in that case. How lovely is your world, O God, in its golden radiance, when your glory descends and paints the dust with glitter, when the red light that shines from the clouds falls silently upon my window. Could I complain? Could I be afraid? Could I lose faith in you and in myself? No. I already bear your heaven here in my breast.
we call forward Victor and Jonathan, Gil's sons, and his granddaughter Maylin to share in their words.
Our family wants to thank all of you for coming today and the concern for my father over the last few weeks. Pop led an impactful life in the community, at work, with students, with his family. Many of you know him from his contributions and commitment to many causes in the community at large, many in tandem with our mother. He simply wouldn't accept indifference if he saw injustice. As my cousin Richard said, they made contributions to the world that all of us envy and few of us can match. Over the last few weeks, I've thought a lot about my father. He was passionate, he was moral, passionate about knowledge, science, classical music, Italian, and Sonia. He was a scientist all his life, from the early days at the Newark Museum to a long and productive career at DuPont, to his retirement at the University of Pennsylvania, mentoring students and continuing to tinker. He was also a teacher. He knew about so many things. It came to be that our kids, when they wanted to know the answer to a question, they would simply say, "Ask Gilbert." Early on, he taught me so many things that have shaped my life and that are much more appreciated today. As a kid, I loved doing projects around the house with him, and we would build things together. And while he was able to do various trades, which he learned from his father, when we would finish a chore and it wasn't just quite right, he would say to me, "Well, we maintained our amateur status." I always think of my father as a worker. He taught me about how to work hard and do your best. One of my favorite stories is about a job he had in college. He did not have the luxury of not working in college. And he saw an ad for a job at the Horner Lumber Company in Houghton, Michigan. When he showed up, Mr. Horner asked him if he was a student at the college. "Yes, sir," replied Pop. "Mr. Horner, nothing doing, kid." When my father, who was not to take no for an answer, asked why, Mr. Horner said, "College kids don't come back for the second day. The work's too hard." My father was there for several years. I asked Pop about his willingness to work hard given his great academic achievements. He gave credit to his parents and his older brother, Seymour, who set an example with their sacrifices when he was younger. Pop said to me, "One did what one had to do," describing the work undertaken by the family when he was growing up. But Pop loved his work as a scientist. He was passionate about discovery and finding the answer to how to solve a problem, which was often how to make a material purer. This was frequently through crystallization. I was learning about crystals in school, and I asked Pop if we could grow some at home. And after an hour or two of heating and cooling sugar and salt solutions, I turned to him and I said, "Do you really get paid for this?" And his reply was, "Yes, don't tell anyone." That's true. My father always provided gentle guidance, and it was succinct and to the point and meaningful. Here are a few life lessons that will always be with me. When all else fails, read the directions. When I would ask him about how to handle a situation, it was about taking the moral high ground. He would say simply, "Do what's right." To ask permission is to invite denial. But in typical fashion, Pop countered with the advice to be very judicious with this tactic. Life is about choices and the consequences that come with them. Which brings me to one of my favorite lessons from Pop. When faced with a challenge or a difficult situation, he would say to me, "It's always appropriate to take a thoughtful pause." I've passed this on to family, friends, and colleagues. So let's all pause for a moment and reflect on a life well lived. We've all had the privilege to be influenced by Gilbert, and we and this world are all better for having had him for a spectacular 94 years. I love you, Pop.
I'd like to thank our family and friends who shared such beautiful words. Rabbi Robinson, Cantor Pellin, thank you for a wonderful service. Gus and Gabriel, I know my father was listening, and I know he thought it was beautiful. My father's favorite quote is guidance from the Jewish sage Hillel. "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" Hillel and my father have many parallels. Like Hillel, my father grew up poor. Living in Newark, New Jersey, at one point during the Depression, his father, for whom I am named, had a job in a restaurant. His only compensation was whatever food he could salvage for the family. When my father was 8 or 9, he became involved in the Newark Museum's Junior Museum program, which was his first exposure to science. Always a voracious reader, an engineer from the factory across the street saw him reading chemistry books and via a long and convoluted path helped my father gain admission to Michigan Tech. This was the days before the Mackinac Bridge, so the only way home to New Jersey was through Chicago. One winter break, not having the money for bus fare, he found someone who would give him a ride. But the condition was my father would share the driving. The only problem, he didn't know how to drive. But wanting to get home, he learned by doing. If I am not for myself, who will be? Growing up, my brother and I were exposed to science from an early age. When other kids had volcanoes made from baking soda and vinegar, ours were made from potassium permanganate and glycerol. Trust me, it's way cooler than baking soda. I became interested in the periodic table, and over the years, my father assembled a collection of about 85 of the 92 naturally occurring elements. I've since had the opportunity to share this collection with Malin and Anlin science classes. And years ago, I was thrilled when NPR referred to me as the science police when I sent in a correction to a story, noting that dry ice does not melt, but sublimes. It was something my father told me when I was about 10, but I couldn't get my head around it until much later. And when Sandra moved into an apartment in Queens, I offered to refinish her floors. The building superintendent came by and asked where I'd learned how to do this. I said, "My father taught me." "Oh, is he a super too?" he asked. He seemed disappointed to find out that he was a chemist. But my father wasn't just about science. He did know how to have fun. My mother's relatives, the Osers, sent us a toboggan one year. My father had built a sled run down to the creek behind our house, complete with a gas-powered tow rope. He told me and my brother Jonathan, "Let me show you how it's done." A few minutes later, he came back up the hill with one shoulder hanging down. He dislocated it. When we went to the emergency room, the doctor said, "How'd you do it?" When he said sledding, the doctor's response was, "Come on, you can tell me the truth." When Jonathan was 6 or 7, he liked to put Chiquita banana stickers on my father's forehead. One evening, my parents were at the Grand Opera House for a classical music performance, and my mother noticed people pointing and laughing. Turning to him, she realized he'd left the house with a sticker still on his head. His beloved wife, Sonia, our mother, grandmother, whom we lost in 2019, was often described as a force of nature. In charity and politics, there are many people who owe a tremendous debt to her. But my father played a critical, if less overt, role in many of the causes they supported and the windmills at which they tilted. This is perhaps exemplified by the gala dinner they attended, where his name tag read, Mr. Sonia Sloan. And he was not only okay, but happy with that. During the Vietnam War, my father served on the local draft board as its only anti-war member. He saw the inequities in who went and who was deferred, and finally resigned in protest, which made front page news in the local paper. But my parents put their money where their mouth was. One Saturday afternoon, one of the ACLU's volunteer attorneys called. A young man had been arrested hitchhiking to a protest march in Washington, and through a search that was later ruled illegal, they found marijuana. The lawyer wanted to know if my parents would bail this young man out. We went to meet this young man, Ron Farizzi. My parents asked Ron, "Why don't you call your parents?" He said, "My father is a Philadelphia cop." To make a long story short, my parents were asked if they put the deed to their house up as bond for this young man, whom they just met. They talked it over with us, and we all agreed it was the right thing to do. We are still in touch with Ron 50 years later. If not now, when? In 1961, my parents were co-founders of the ACLU of Delaware and later received jointly their Gerald Candler Award. My father served for many years on the board of Jewish Family Service, and though they both worked for DuPont, they actually met at the Young Democrats. At one meeting, the members were arguing vociferously over whether to spend $10 on something. My father said something like, "Why are we arguing about such BS when there are so many important things to worry about?" and threw $10 down on the table. My mother went home to her parents and said, "I met a guy I could really like." And when my mother died, my father said, "The only thing we were in conflict over in our 62 years was that I loved and she hated the German language and vocal music. For the rest, we were in accord." Even after retiring from DuPont, my father would go to the lab 2 or 3 times a week with his friend and colleague Drew McGee. A few years ago, I was fortunate to have 2 scientific publications. That same year at 91, my father had 3. And synthesis, purification, and characterization of N,N'-di1-naphthol-N,N'-diphenylbenzidine was presented at the 48th Annual Meeting of the North American Thermal Analysis Society in August 2022. I have no idea what that means, but having a scientific publication at 94 speaks volumes about his love for science and his continuing engagement. He continued to mentor students at Penn until the pandemic. If I am only for myself, if I am not for others, who am I? He adored our daughters. At age 82, he took Maylin, who was then obsessed to dinosaurs, to North Dakota for a week-long paleontology dig. They came home with filthy clothes and several boxes of dinosaur bones. He was an active participant in the fundraising campaign for Onlin's orphanage, and he delighted in proudly wearing merch from their various academic institutions. He attended several of Onlin's orchestra concerts at the Pennington School, was thrilled to attend Maylin's graduation from the Solberry School, and delighted in continuing the 3-generation family tradition of Sunday pancakes. When we would visit, he would thank us, and especially my wife Sandra Gong, for taking such good care of him, bringing him prepared meals. Despite my mother's many firsts as a woman, she did almost all of the cooking. But he would follow with something like, "I don't want to be a burden." We would always tell him that this is what families do for each other. We sought to carry on his and Hillel's guidance. If not now, when? I'll end by quoting a hero of mine, Jackie Robinson, who said, "A life is not important, except in the impact it has on other lives." From me and my brother, to our spouses and our daughters, to Ron Farizzi, to those draftees for whom he fought so hard, to the beneficiaries of his scientific achievements and mentorship, as well as of his and my late mother's other activism and causes. There's no way to adequately measure the impact Gilbert Sloan had on our world, but we will all remember him for blessing.
First of all, thank you for coming. Sorry. Sorry. Please bear with me as I repeat one of Grandpa's favorite sayings. Ohne Musik wäre das Leben ein Irrtum. Without music, life would be a mistake. To many, you knew Gilbert as a father, a colleague, an acquaintance, and a friend. I knew him as Grandpa. He was as loving as he was intelligent and gentle, and his love traveled in the boxes of pears he would send to my apartment in D.C. with a sticker that read, "From your loving Grandpa." His love was written in the letters he sent all of us, and in the pages of Calvin and Hobbes books he would read to me. He showed his love by rubbing my back until I fell asleep, and whenever I asked, he would always say, "Of course." He showed his love through the many texts he would send. One, I remember, when he said after my birthday, "Sonia and I cherished every day you spent with us." He encouraged all of us to never really stop learning, be it whatever we were interested in, language, science, or politics. He would encourage me and my sister to continue practicing the piano, and he always reminded us of our strengths instead of our weaknesses. Most of all, I think we can agree, he taught us all to be kind and to love others in our own ways, just as he did in his own way. Grandpa, I cherished every day I spent with you, and I remember when you would roll me around on the floor when I was young because I couldn't stop laughing. And I remember that beautiful morning when you read the poem, "Loveliest of trees, the cherry now," with the sun streaming through the curtains and songbirds singing outside. I remember, which I now know I have in common with Jonathan, Uncle Jonathan, when you showed me how to grow bismuth crystals in the basement. While they weren't nearly as iridescent as lab-grown ones, they were beautiful in their own way, just like you. Now I hold these memories in my heart, and there you'll always be. We love you, and we will miss you more than any language can hope to articulate.
God, you give us loved ones and make them the strength of our life, the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way, but you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. O God, we see life as through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures as you, O God, endure forever. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that is the dwelling place of your love and glory. We take a moment for silent reflection.
May the Lord bless thee and keep thee. May the Lord let his countenance shine upon gracious unto thee. May the Lord lift his countenance upon thee and give thee peace.
Physically, spiritually, we rise for Al Malei Rachamim.
El Malei Rachamim, Shochen Bamromim, Hamsei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, In Kiddushim Udiurim, Ki Zohar Mazhirim, En Yishmat Yakarnu, Shechalach Le'olamo, Ba'arachamim, Yastireha B'Seter Kenafav Le'olamim, Vayitru B'Yitzruch HaChaim Et Nishmata, Adonai Hu Nachalato, V'yanuach B'Shalom HaMishkavo, V'nomar
Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Gilbert Jacob Sloan, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in the shadow of your wings, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. When I die, give what's left of me away to children and old men that wait to die. And if you need to cry, cry for your brother walking the street beside you. And when you need me, put your arms around anyone and give them what you need to give me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved. And if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not in your mind. You can love me best by letting hands touch hands, by letting bodies touch bodies, by letting go of children that need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. With love, therefore, we offer words of praise, praise of God's name, as we turn to Mourner's Kaddish. For those who wish to join with the family, the prayer books in your pews have the reading on page 294. Yet Gadal, Viet Kadash, Shemei Rabbah, Bialma Divra Chirute, Viamlich Malchute, Bechayechon, Uvyomechon, Uvachaye Dechol Beit Yisrael, Ba'gala Uvisman Kariv, V'imru Amen. Yehe Shemei Rabbah Mevarach Le'olam U'Lalmei Almaya, Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam V'yitnaseh V'yit Hadar V'yit Aleh V'yit Halal Shemei D'Kudusha Barichu Le'ela Min Kol Birchata V'Shirata Tushbechata V'Nechemata Da'amiran Bi'alma V'yimru Amen. Yehi Shalama Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chaim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Ya'aseh Shalom, Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael, V'imru Amen. May God grant peace to those who mourn and comfort to the bereaved among us, as we say, Amen. Let's be seated. Many thanks to our various ushers and greeters, members of our congregational leadership this morning, to our musicians, Gabriel Benton and Gus Mercante, this morning, and to all of you for being here with the family. At the conclusion of our service, there will be a meal of condolence in our social hall just behind our sanctuary, that away. All are welcome to come and partake in it, and if you haven't had a chance to touch base with Victor or Jonathan and their families, that would be a good opportunity to do so. And of course, at the conclusion of the service, there will be an opportunity, if you did not have a chance to sign one of the register books, to go ahead and do so. There will be Shiva tonight at the late residence starting at 5 o'clock. There'll be a minyan at 5:30, and that'll go till about 7 o'clock. That's tonight. With that, we conclude by all of us joining together in expressing our condolences to Jonathan and Victor and your families. For those who are here to be gathered with them and their families, I ask you to repeat these words after me, speaking them to the mourners. May God console you with all who mourn in Zion and Jerusalem. Hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch sha'ar v'lei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. And now we go forth in peace to life as we say, Amen.